I could definitely see how building that for that many years. I mean, now you probably have, like you said, people call you and you don't have to go out and attempt to get new business because they're always
never
calling you.
solicited business from a client who didn't approach us first.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good?
Mm-hmm.
Camera?
Yep.
Okay, well, here's a question that's not on here then. Off the top of your head, how many companies or businesses do you think you personally, not personally, your team, has saved?
I don't claim to save anybody. They save themselves. We're the midwives.
Okay.
We don't give birth to children. We help children.
Okay,
be
so
born.
how many
It would be
situations
the
you
height of
believe you
arrogance to
mediated?
say that we have saved a company.
Okay, without being arrogant, how many companies do you think you've mediated or midwives?
We have helped clients get through potentially franchise-threatening crises. In the 12 years that my firm has been in business, 200.
200?
I've been doing this for 35 years. I've had over 1,000 different individual companies or other distinct entities, governments, NGOs, universities as clients. Of the several hundred that we in the last 12 years have helped get through the problem, about a dozen of them probably wouldn't have stayed in business or in
Okay.
existence. The others would have suffered meaningfully and might have had to form some kind of alternative structure. They might have had to be bought by someone or merged into someone. So they would have suffered meaningful competitive disadvantage.
Okay, next question. When communicating with other people, do you spend more time speaking and relaying, talking to them, or you're typically laid back and listening to them?
With clients, at a first meeting, we never say, let us give you an introduction to our firm.
You got a
We always
little
say-
less formal.
Help us understand
Mhm.
whether we can be helpful to you. What do you think is the challenge we're facing? And then we listen, and we listen
Okay.
intently, and we
So
ask
you always
questions.
typically listen first with clients?
With a new client,
Okay.
or a client presenting us with a new challenge.
Okay.
Having said that, much of our work is in the training and teaching world, and there, however much listening one does, it's more active listening while speaking.
Yeah.
And so I'm still listening when I'm teaching a class of 20 or of 200, but I'm listening in a different way because I'm talking at that time too.
Yeah, like you're more receiving feedback and
Right.
playing off of
But-
people, but
but-
you're not just listening
But
to
the
them talk.
technique of giving advice of the sort we give is to listen so intently and then ask questions in such a way that the client ultimately figures out the solution themselves.
Okay.
That if we have to say, here's the solution, we've probably failed.
Do you give presentations at work? What types of visual aids do you use?
I am in front of a group of people between school and client trainings between 6 and 10 times a week. And I typically use, although I don't typically like, some form of PowerPoint
Okay.
or
Let's see. What interpersonal communication challenges do you face in this position? So, being at the top of the food chain.
I've been saying this for as long as I've been in business. The two big barriers in my life are time and space. And if I could master time and space, I'd be a lot more successful.
I believe we all would.
If you have an idea on how to do that, let me know.
Well, let's
I
start on
spend-
time then.
I
Let's
s-
start on time.
Well, start on time.
Okay.
There's so many things I need to get done in the course of a day, with so many people in so many different places and in so many different time zones, that it's very hard just to keep up.
Okay, so it's just simply too much.
They're just way too much. As a result, I have to triage. And for a significant amount of time, I'm on airplanes. Or I'm only available at a time when the person in the other time zone is no longer available.
Because there's a lot of things you can't control, like an airplane. Once you're on it,
Or-
you can't be there faster or slower.
I'm in Europe and they're in San Francisco.
Sorry.
And I'm in Eastern Europe and they're in San Francisco. So there's no overlap of...
Yeah.
It's almost as bad as being in Asia and then being on the East Coast. So there are time zone challenges which are tough.
I was going to ask you that the other day with all your traveling, how your sleep schedule, how your circadian rhythm is.
My doctor, he was amazed that I'm only as unhealthy as I am.
Wow.
But it's because I've been doing it for 25 years, and
Okay.
the challenge in terms of space is interpersonal communication. What Lukashevsky sometimes calls belly-to-belly communication
Okay.
is far more powerful than communication at a distance. And anytime there's mediation, whether it's technology mediation or just mediation as like the game of telephone.
Yeah.
One
My
person,
people will call your
I
people.
mean you to convey to them,
Yeah. The
there's
message is
some
not the
loss
same. Yeah.
of effectiveness, either some loss of accuracy or some loss of urgency or some loss of emphasis. And even Skype, which is good for what it is, isn't the solution to
Yeah.
all the problems. So part of the challenge is, with clients everywhere, how do we make interpersonal contact with clients in a meaningful way that adds value, and then be able to get to the next gig?
Okay.
And that's tough.
Because you can't spend too much on one. You could easily dedicate a lot of time to one, but you have many.
And they don't want to pay us because
Yeah.
we're expensive. And they don't want to pay us to spend more time with them than they need,
Yeah.
because eventually it adds up.
And they have their own things that
And
they
they
need
have
to
to, they have a lot
obviously-
of other things they have to do.
Makes sense. If you had to pick, what would be worse, time or space? All the multiple things you
Time.
constantly have to do?
Time is harder
Okay.
than space.
Time is harder than space.
Yeah.
So time is the winner. Okay.
And here's the challenge. Leaders who wouldn't dare presume to fiddle with an architect's work product. So, architect comes in and says, "Boss, here's the design for the new headquarters." The CEO wouldn't look at the design and say, "That's beautiful. But you see this beam?
Yeah.
I'd like to move it 7 inches to the right."
Because he's not an architect.
Right. Or a lawyer's brief.
Yeah.
"This is a brilliant brief, but you know the second counterclaim? I'd like to say it this way." They take the professional communicator's work product,
Mm-hmm.
and the first thing they do is pick up a pen, and they start to mark it up. And they wouldn't do that with any other function.
Yeah.
And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that and talking to leaders about that. And I believe leaders misunderstand what communication really is. But most leaders have just grown up
Mm-hmm.
speaking in a way that works for them and writing in a way that works for them. And they don't take communication as seriously as they take every other corporate function, because they think they're already good at it. And the reason they have people in the communication department is to outsource what they could otherwise do just as well,
Yeah.
but they don't have the time for. So I have a speechwriter. I can do my own speeches, but I don't have time, so I have my speechwriter.
So you
do
have a
the
speech writer.
And that ultimately becomes a really insulting attitude.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, it's a counterproductive attitude for the leader, because the leader is usually wrong
Yeah.
that he can do it or she can do it just as well as the professional communicators. They think that communication is the process of speaking and reading and writing,
Yeah.
where really communication is the process of moving people.
Yes.
It's the process of changing people, and it has to be taken as seriously as every other corporate function. We always start with a presenting problem because that's what the client thinks they have.
Mhm.
But ultimately, it becomes a discussion about the underlying problem, and you can't fix the presenting problem until you fix the underlying problem.
So would you say
you
a lot of
can
clients
feel better about it.
Yeah.
And part of the problem is most clients misdefine the problem.
Okay.
So keynote,
If you don't mind me asking, how come you don't like it?
because much PowerPoint is done badly,
Okay.
including some of mine. And you heard the old adage that power corrupts, but PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. And business audiences have gotten conditioned to expect the PowerPoint for content.
Okay.
Uh,
So would you say you don't like it because you feel like it can almost be an easy way out for a speaker?
Well, the way I put it with clients is this, and I tend to work with senior clients. Said, so sir or ma'am, here's how I imagine your presentation today was developed.
Okay.
You told some staff person way down the chain of command, prepare some slides for me for this conference I'm speaking at. Yes, I did. So that person low in the chain of command is very worried about missing something. So that person's going to put a lot of stuff on a lot of slides.
Much to read.
And is going to not know what you're going to say. And therefore is going to put all the stuff you could say
Exactly.
on a slide.
Because they're so low that they have to cover themselves.
It's what in Wall Street is sometimes called associate anxiety.
Okay.
I don't want to miss something because I don't want to be fired. And so they then hand it up the chain of command, and it goes through a few hands before it gets to you, and in almost every instance, each hand adds something.
Yeah.
Doesn't take stuff out. By the time it gets to you, you're just getting off a plane from Asia, you're exhausted, you've got to speak tomorrow morning. You go through it, you tweak a little bit on the slides, but the incumbent document is this low-level first draft staff project. And you just fix whatever's broken, move the order of things, but then you take this ineffective product, and that becomes what's on the screen, and you just read what's on the screen.
Yeah.
And they smile and say, yeah, that's what we did.
That's exactly what they did.
And I then ask, would you want to sit through that?
But yeah,
And
do you think that's
no, this
what
is
would a
deadly.
reasonable person
Right,
think?
this is deadly. What would good criterion? So I then start with the way to prepare is to ask who's in the room.
Whose audience?
When you're done, what do you need them to feel that they wouldn't otherwise feel? What do you need them to think that they wouldn't otherwise think? What do you need them to know that they wouldn't otherwise know? What would you need them to do that they wouldn't otherwise do? When you have an answer to that, you then ask, what do they need to hear or see, or experience or participate in order to think and feel and know and do that?
Okay.
How do you organize your engagement so that they hear and see and experience, participate in that? What is the sequence of content? And then, what is your big framing statement? What are your 3 themes that bring that framing statement to life? What is the individual content within those 3 themes? And then, finally, when you've got all of that, here's the order in which I'm going to convey what I'm going to convey. You then ask, what visuals will help amplify this content? If you start that way, you end up with a much more powerful interaction that people are likely to pay attention to and likely to remember.
Yeah.
And then the slide becomes something that supports you
Supplementary.
rather than you being there to support the slide.
Yeah.
And the way, frankly, that executives respond well to it is, the big question is who's in control of what? If all you're doing is reading words off a slide, then the slides are in control of you, and why would you marginalize yourself?
Yeah.
But if the slides amplify your content, then you're in control of the slides.
Okay.
The challenge for most executives is they don't take that function so seriously that they budget the time to prepare effectively. So part of the homework I use with my clients when I'm coaching them on how to be effective leadership communicators is you need to budget the time. And yeah, you might ask someone down the chain of command to do some statistical slides for you. Take those statistics and then ask, of all the data points on this slide, what's the essence that I can convey in one thing? Is it an arrow going up? Is it a circle that turns red?
Make it more simple.
And there's usually something like 55 to 80 data points on a business person's slide. I want one.
Yeah.
Give me a visual that captures the essence of that slide. And then talk about the content.
Yeah.
And if they need the numbers, give them a handout afterwards.
Yeah, because if you need to go back to the numbers, you can always go back to that. Anyone can read off a slide.
Right.
Well, that was definitely eye-opening. I'll probably never do PowerPoints the same.
Good. We need to say, given what you've told us, here is our statement of the problem.
So it all goes back to you saying you want to show them, and you want them to realize for themselves.
Is this the problem that you're actually facing?
Okay.
Yeah. And based on what you told us, your goal is the following. Is that still your goal? Yes. And based on what you've told us, it seems that there are three options you can consider. You can consider the do nothing out of the ordinary option, and here's how it would work. You could consider the do something incremental option, and here's how it would work. And you could consider the do something big option, and here's how it would work. Does that sound like the options you need to consider? Yes. When you think of the first option, what are the likely consequences?
Okay,
And
cool.
when you think of the second option, what are the likely consequences? When you think of the third option, what are the likely consequences? Which of those consequences would you rather live with? And they'll say, oh, I'd rather live with that set of consequences. Well, great. How would you implement that strategy? And
So you're helping them, but you're only really helping them help themselves.
They aren't invested in it if they haven't participated in the solution. And so our task is to listen intently enough to tease out of them the solution that they know in their hearts they need to find. We can be the midwife of the solution, but we're rarely the originators of the solution.
Gotcha.
And one of the reasons for that is this, and this is a foundational principle of the work we do. Every crisis is a business problem before it's a communication problem. And you can't communicate your way out of a business problem. And so when we go to a client, if we were to go to a client, to a company and say, we know you're in crisis, we think we can help you, they say, great, we want you to say these things. That's not the right approach. When a client comes out and says, we're in trouble, we need help, ultimately, the help that they need is changing something about themselves.
Yeah.
You know, you have a product that is hurting people. Stop hurting people.
Exactly.
I can have you say any number of things, but until you stop hurting people, you're not
Until
gonna
you
get
stop
through
the problem,
Yeah.
you can't just patch it.
So it's the difference between the presenting problem and the underlying problem. And part of the listening is to be able to move the client from the presenting problem to the underlying problem.
We good?
You are on.
Excellent. Okay. What do you consider the most important traits of a good communicator?
I would say there are three significant traits of an effective communicator.
Okay.
The first is the technical skill of understanding how to use language effectively in all of its forms.
Okay.
And for many people, that technical skill is seen to be sufficient, but it's not. The second critical element of effective communication is understanding the significance of human connection
Okay.
and the forms of human connection that are possible and the ways that humans react to things. In my book, The Power of Communication, I define effective communication this way. Communication is an act of will directed toward a living entity that reacts. And if we don't get the reaction we wanted, we haven't communicated effectively. So communication is not about sending. It's not about understanding the forms of language by themselves, but it's about applying them in ways that create human connection, that change the audience, by provoking a reaction, and that the reaction is a reaction you
And the
want.
desired reaction.
Right.
Cool.
So that's the second element of
Okay.
an effective communicator. The third element of the effective communicator is what makes that second one possible.
Okay.
And that is, it won't work if the communicator doesn't care about the other person.
Like we were talking about yesterday,
Yeah.
you can't fake it.
You
need
can't
to,
fake
you need
it.
to genuinely
You
care.
can't fake it. Because then you end up saying things like, I'd like my life back, after you say, I'm sorry. So the first principle of my book, The Power of Communication is the continuation of business by other means, and it is as much a discipline as accounting and finance and supply chain management and engineering and law, and the executive needs to take it as seriously as he or she takes those functions, and has to recognize that unlike engineering or unlike law or unlike accounting, unless they come from that, they aren't good at it.
Mm-hmm. Unless they grew up around it.
Unless
they're not
they
used
grew
to
up in it, they're not good at it. They're not good, generally, at changing people intentionally, because they've never had to study it. They've never had to be good at it.
And if they're the CEO, they're just in charge, so...
The higher one
Yeah.
goes in the enterprise, the less their work is the technical skill that got them there. And the more the work is inspiring people to do something they otherwise would rather not do. So yes, they have to be the best communicator in any room, but that's not enough.
Okay.
They also have to be able to make the human connection that provokes the reaction they want. And for that to happen, they need to genuinely care about what the other person cares about. You can't move them if you don't meet them where they are. Well, you can't meet them where they are if you don't know where they are. And you won't know where they are unless you care about where they are.
I like the last thing you said is probably better than the
Of
whole...
course, we buried the lead.
Excellent.
Yeah.
They need to genuinely care, and you can't meet them where they are unless you know where they are.
And you can't know where they are unless you
Genuinely care.
care.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, that'll about wrap it up.
Good. My favorite is a company that came to me and said, we've got a Fortune magazine problem. I said, oh really? What is your Fortune magazine problem? And they said, Fortune magazine is going to write a story saying that our CEO has taken excessive loans from the board of directors and has lived too lavish a lifestyle and has taken his eyes off the ball, and as a result our stock has fallen by 90% and we're at risk of being taken over by another company. I said, and you think that that's a Fortune magazine problem?
It's clearly...
And they said, well, sure, because we don't want Fortune to publish that. I said, great. We can solve the Fortune magazine problem.
But you can't fix the CEO living the lifestyle.
Well, I can imagine that we could find a way to get Fortune magazine not to write that story.
Yeah.
But whoever gave that story to Fortune magazine will turn around and give it to the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, there's other magazines.
So you've got a CEO out of control governance problem, and you're about to be swallowed up by a bigger company problem.
Yeah.
So you need to not see this as a communication problem. You have a governance problem.
Yes.
And you have a possible transfer of ownership problem. So until you address the underlying governance problem, you won't survive. That was the chairman of the board. The CEO was the guy who had the chairman of the board was not executive. He had me come in and talk to his board. I talked to his board. He had me talk to the CEO. I talked to the CEO. Within a week, the CEO announced his retirement, announced that he had arranged to sell off some of his properties to be able to repay back all the loans to the company. He announced that he was stepping aside immediately pending his retirement in 2 months.
So the public apology.
Brought in a new CEO immediately to take over. That new CEO immediately began a process of changing the policies the old CEO had done, and the stock went from, it had fallen from $100 to $9 a share. It went immediately to 12. Within a month it was up to 20. And
Wow.
suddenly it was no longer takeover vulnerable. So it ultimately stayed independent.
Wow.
But that's because they were able to address the underlying problem, which was CEO out of control, and not the presenting problem. Fortune magazine is going to say our CEO's out of control. We couldn't have gotten to that solution if we heard, we got a Fortune magazine problem, so great, let us learn all we can about Fortune magazine.
Exactly.
That's the presenting problem. It isn't the way to actually help the company survive.